Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Wherever you are joining from, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. So my name is Karis Reed. I'm the Social Protection Officer with the ILO in Jerusalem. And the ILO is working here towards establishing a comprehensive, sustainable, and adequate social protection system for all Palestinians in line with international labour standards. So I'm pleased to welcome you to the webinar today on operationalising the HDP nexus for social protection in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. Although the humanitarian context has been going on for a long time in Palestine, until recently, there was still a lack of coordination or joint planning by actors across the nexus. So this is what we're going to focus on today. The uniqueness of the Palestinian context and the long protracted crisis has meant that we've had to approach things in a different way. So this webinar will aim to share learnings and lessons from our work so far. To do this, we have a diverse range of speakers from across the humanitarian development government spectrum, all based in Palestine. So you can see their bios on the screen in a minute. First, my colleague, Momin Badarna, he's the Social Protection Coordinator with the ILO, will provide a background to the context and framing for our work. And then Luca Sangalli, the National Cash Working Group Coordinator, will go through our work on coordination across the nexus and share some innovations in this field from Palestine. Next, Iain Murray, the Chief of Social Policy at UNICEF, will give an overview of shock responsive social protection in Palestine. And then Omar Ghrieb, the Policy and Campaigns Officer at Oxfam, will go into detail on innovations in coordination for shock response at the local level. Finally, we're honoured to have Manal Ramadan here. She's the Director General of Planning and Aid Coordination with the Ministry of Social Development. So she will provide feedback from the PA's perspective on the work so far, what has gone well and what we need to work further on. And we will have space for a Q&A and discussion at the end, and I will be your moderator. So we really want to hear your reactions and interact with the participants online. If what we've shared resonates with you or differs, and if you have any lessons to offer us as well. So please put your feedback in the chat box. And if you have any questions, please write them into the Q&A box, stating your name and your organization if possible. We would love to hear from you. And then if you have any reactions or ideas that you want to share on social media, please use the hashtag that is on the screen as well. So with that, I will hand over to Momin to start with, and we'll have around an hour of presentations and then 30 minutes for discussion. Thanks. Go ahead, Momin.
Thank you, Karis. Just give me a second to share my screen. Can you all see my screen now? All of it?
Yeah.
I guess, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Karis, and hello, everyone. Good to be with you all here today. In my presentation, I will provide you with a brief overview of the project, some of the work that resulted in the grant so far, in addition to some key learnings that we have developed so far around the nexus approach in Palestine. I will first start my presentation with getting you acquainted with the context in Palestine, since many of the participants and attendees here are not really in the country. So I think it's important to get acquainted with this complex environment to see where the nexus is actually working, and to have that done before the project's overview. So briefly in the context in Palestine, as you might know, we have a protracted crisis. The political situation is very difficult, and the occupation is ongoing in the country for around now 75 years, which limits our capabilities as international organizations on the ground, in addition to our ability to advocate for reforms and have it implemented in the ground. we witnessed different reoccurring shocks, mainly related to conflict as well, and escalations, leaving many people behind, vulnerable and marginalized. This is, of course, in addition to the chronic financial crisis, which the PA, the government here, has been suffering from for several years now, that in turn negatively impacted the one main government cash transfer program operating in the country, which you could see in my second point in the presentation. So we have one main government cash transfer program, which is poverty targeted, used in the PMT formula, with the transfer value aiming to cover for half or 50% of deep poverty gap. This program is currently suffering from irregular payments, which made it unable to meet the expectation of the beneficiaries. At the same time, we have long-standing humanitarian safety net programs with considerable budgets that try to compensate for the lack of payments of the national program. However, there remains limited coordination in the social protection sector, which leads to inefficiency of targeting provision of payments and benefits, as well as to inclusion and exclusion errors between the different programs as well. At last, we have very limited social insurance system in the country. We only have a social security system for public sector and security officials of the government of the Palestinian Authority, in addition to some local bodies, like, for example, universities, municipalities, who optionally, voluntarily chose to join the social security of the public sector. So we have the private sector, which is completely uncovered, except for legal protections in the labor law. This brings me to another slide, which is basically why coordination is needed in the country. As I said, we have many actors. We have long-standing humanitarian safety nets programs. So we have different actors with more or less same objectives. So the government and non-government programs, both designed to reach vulnerable Palestinians and those living in poverty. So pretty much everything's focused on the PMT formula. Therefore, it's really important to enhance coordination between these actors in order to create efficiencies in the delivery of the benefits and reaching the objectives set in the design of the programs. Second is that we have sizable players and high potential. It's similar, both the humanitarian and government programs are large, but lack of coordination limits their effectiveness. And we have humanitarian safety net programs conceived for emergencies, but have become more structural and represent an integral part of the Palestinian social protection system right now. So as we know, those humanitarian safety net programs are not intended to stay forever. However, with the current situation in the country, they have become more well-established and they constitute a large portion of the social protection system in Palestine. Therefore, these efforts should be made to coordinate widely. There should be efforts to coordinate widely in the sector between these programs as well. The results of all of this is a fragmented system with a scattered results. So we have significant variation in transfer typology, level of benefits by program and actor. Some beneficiaries, we put it here in the presentation, would feel luckier than others, but it's more or less as well the result of limited coordination as well, which resulted in inclusion and exclusion of beneficiaries. So after I explained the context of the country and why coordination is needed, we'll go now to the project's overview after we explained the why, to say how we did increase coordination, enhance coordination in the nexus approach in Palestine. So the project is strengthening nexus coherence and responsiveness of the Palestinian social protection sector. It is funded by the EU, implemented by the ILO, jointly the ILO, UNICEF, and Oxfam. We have, the project started in 2021 and will run until March 2024, so next year. And at the beginning, I mentioned that in Palestine, we have limited coordination in the sector and also very reoccurring shocks in the country. So in order to tackle these two main issues, we have built the design for the project around two specific objectives that deal with these issues. The first one is rights-based and nexus programmatic coherence of social protection is enhanced. And the second one is responsiveness of the social system is enhanced. Of course, here we're talking about the non-contributory social protection programs, so the social assistance sector. And I'm not going to go into the details of each objective, as my colleagues who will be presenting as well will dig deeper into the details. However, it's important just to say that in the Palestinian social sector, and for many years, we have had coordination bodies at the level of only information sharing, separately operating for the humanitarian side alone and the development side alone. One of the main initiatives under specific objective number 1 under this project is that we introduced what we call now the Cash and Voucher Assistance Thematic Working Group that includes several actors for the first time in the country from both development and humanitarian actors, that is as well co-chaired jointly by development and humanitarian actors. That is represented by Ministry of Social Development and OCHA in the country. This thematic working group does not set only to share info, but rather do small prototypes of particular issues that in the sector where a group of actors would try to work out an issue related, for example, coverage or adequacy of transfers to ensure that actual coordination is taking place. So a small set of issues to do it within a small group of actors and to be built upon in the future. My colleague, Luca from the National Cash Working Group will be speaking more about this in his slide. So as you see, we have in specific objective 1 more of the thematic working group, but also knowledge base. We have done workshops, mapping of interventions, synthesis, and so on, which will now come in the next slide. So what have we done so far in terms of specific objective number 1, coherence in policy and planning, aiming to increase coordination as well, away from the body that we have just spoken about. Again, we have so many actors in the sector with different programs, considerable budgets, and large number of beneficiaries. So we saw that it was important to map out all these programs operating in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in order to bring some visibility to all these different things going on in the sector. As you could see, we have now a finished product online dashboard of this mapping. It's just a first version that is available online. So we can post it in the chat and for you to see what is the outcome of this analysis or mapping. But the next step would be is to conduct analysis using the data from this mapping to assess opportunities for harmonization across the nexus. Talking about coverage, targeting, program objectives, budgets, and other parameters. So, so you have the link. We will post in the chat and for you then to explore. Another work is a novel report on alternative transfer value determination mechanisms in Palestine. This report basically proposes alternative transfer value determination mechanisms for the national cash transfer program and social allowances, but not exclusively to the government. We have also proposed options for the humanitarian side or the humanitarian agencies to align and harmonize their mechanisms with those of the government. So we have made sure to consult with lots of humanitarian agencies and social protection actors during this process to inform this report. So this report will support and inform the future coordination, coherence, and potential harmonization on transfer value determination mechanisms in the social assistance nexus. Now, all of these reports are available online, and we can also post the links in the chats, including the last report, which I will talk about. Also, for this second report, alternative transfer values determination mechanisms, we have came up with a rather unique approach in applying international labor standards to the determination mechanisms, or to the transfer values determination mechanisms. So we have came up with different options, and for each option, we have applied the international labor standard framework to not only look at the efficiency of each approach, but also at the transparency, adaptability, adequacy of each mechanism. The third report is a synthesis of recent studies relating to the cash voucher assistance nexus in Palestine, with recommendations to the thematic working group we talked about before, the social protection sector working group, and the social development sector strategy. So the rationale, you might look at the title and you say synthesis, and you would read synthesis of recent studies. Why are we rewriting the studies? The rationale behind this report is that basically we have loads and much evidence in the sector in Palestine. And the sector is not new. The sector has been here in Palestine for many, many years. So the question is, why are we still not coordinated enough? Why do we still have limited or weak coordination to some extent in the country? So we used this report to pull out key findings from reports that were produced before across the sector to define solid actions that we want to do, and in a summarized way that the thematic working group could build upon in their prototypes, in their work streams that my colleague Luca will talk about, and as well will inform the development of the next strategy of the Ministry of Social Development. So this is just an example of the online product I was talking about. As you will see, you will have the opportunity to explore it yourself, but I'm just going to give a short example. You have the right around 6 filters from which you could choose, for example, the primary objective of the programs you want to see. What are the programs operating in the country, and what are their primary objectives, to see what kind of coherence do we have, what kind of different programs do we have, and so on. You could also see targeting lists. For example, does this program use the list of the Ministry of Social Development? Does it have their own targeting list or other ministry, for example? So you have here an example of proportion of programs using different targeting lists, and we have 42 programs using the Ministry of Social Development list. I'll leave it for you to see. Truly, it is, I think it's novel, and it's still in the very first version. So we'll aim to have it finalized and ready by beginning of next year as well. So we go to the last 2 slides, which are key learnings generated so far from this project. These are not exclusive. My colleagues as well will complement these. But let's talk about the macro level. Let's see at the level of the country as well, level of the overall project. First of all, in such a protracted crisis, the one we talked about before, the long term is still to strengthen the state, but medium-term goals revolve around alignment and coherence of existing programs. And that's our primary objective under this project, until such a time as a state capacity is increased or more financing is available as well. The second one is that the original log frame of this project focused on analysis and recommendations to build policy coherence. But we had an EU results-oriented monitoring mission that came November last year to conduct a midterm progress review, which recommended that dialogue in itself is an achievement in Palestine, separate to physical reports being produced. That itself was an achievement, as it was a novel step in the nexus approach here. Under the Palestinian Social Protection Sector Working Group, the ILO created the new coordination body, which we talked about, the Thematic Working Group. But the real shift will be creating a shared understanding of the problem and a vision for how to address these, meaning that we always know that there are many coordination bodies, and sometimes these coordination bodies, they just sit, talk, info share, but don't lead to progress on the ground. So this is what we are now trying to learn from with dealing with the prototypes and the small practical coordination processes. The last thing is recent shift in ILO's approach to become more problem-driven, iterative, and adaptive in order to learn from practical attempts, prototypes at coordination between actors, which Luca has again will present to you. And the last one is, I would like to quote an important paragraph from the EU ROM report, the mission that happened in November 2022, which found out that the ILO in the country is perceived by all stakeholders as well placed to coordinate in the nexus due to the ILO's neutrality, meaning that the ILO is not directly implementing development or humanitarian cash programs in the country, and that the ILO enjoys high levels of legitimacy and respect among the main counterparts while being perceived as a facilitator among all humanitarian and development actors. The most important thing, which I think as well helped the ILO in pursuing and leading this project, that it does not have the mandate others have in the humanitarian sector, which allowed the ILO to have a more objective role to facilitate the dialogue and bring all actors together, at the same time being trusted by all other actors, that the ILO is bringing them all together for no hidden agenda, but rather to see how can we work all together on the ground. For now, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your listening. I will stop sharing and I will take the wheel to my colleague, Luca Sangalli from the National Cash Worker Group to present. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Momin, also for providing a number of inputs that I'm going to get back to during my presentation. So I also share my screen. Okay. So as Momin was saying, I'm going through a bit more details on the Social Protection Cash and Voucher Assistance Thematic Working Group, pretty long name, the SPCVA Thematic Working Group. So the group that was created through this project, but very much also a very much needed initiative to start this kind of coordination and dialogue between humanitarian development and social protection actors, sits under the social protection sector in Palestine. That's more of a higher level policy and funding coordination forum, while the SPCVA Thematic Working Group is where really work is done in terms of practical, operational agreements, decision, discussions, and advancement of work towards shared objectives. The group is co-chaired by MoSD, the Ministry of Social Development, which is the leading actor in terms of social protection in Palestine, and OCHA, mainly in the West of co-chair also of the National Cash Working Group. And it has representatives from all groups and constituencies, which, as I'm going through in a couple of slides, is a very positive thing. So you would find in the thematic working group humanitarian actors from local, international NGOs, UN agencies, donors, and then from authorities you find representatives from different directorates of the Ministry of Social Development, but also, for example, representatives from the Prime Minister Office, authorities and departments from the Religious Endowments Ministry, which also has some kind of assistance provided to some segments of vulnerable population. And so it really brings together everybody that should be around the table when it comes to discussing alignment linkages between humanitarian cash and voucher assistance and social protection schemes. We meet on a quarterly basis as the plenary group, but then as I'm going through in a second, there are more frequent meetings happening at different levels. The stated objective here is to find synergies and develop programmatic coherence. That's a word Momin has been using a lot, especially towards harmonized approach. So the idea is we are not here to discuss major frameworks or major high-level elements. We are really looking at operational synergies. And that's why the thematic working group has quickly created some work streams that would focus on specific elements of coordination. So originally we had 4, one on coverage, one on adequacy, one on comprehensiveness and shock responsiveness, really, and then one on referral. These were the groups that, or these are the groups that are meant to move forward the actual work, where the groundwork, so looking at Excel sheets, looking at transfer value calculations, sitting together and reviewing databases, that's where this happens, so the very practical work, technical work also that is needed. Interestingly, they're called work streams and not task forces or task teams, because we don't expect them to disappear at a certain point. They're not going to reach a point where they solved everything and they're just going to disappear. Instead, they are going to stay with this work in the next months and years, and adapting to the changes and the developments of this long-term work. They're open to all interested agencies, which is both a positive but also a challenging aspect, and I'm going into it in the next slides. And as Momin was saying, they work through prototype and analysis. What does that mean is that we're not trying to agree on the maximums, on the larger systems and then try to make them work at a detailed level. Instead, we're taking a bit the opposite approach. So we are trying to work on small or very small coordination bits. Okay, it can be cross-checking 30 households, trying to align 2 calculations of transfer values, referring 5 households to the ministry, and seeing what kind of feedback we get. So very, very, very small bits of coordination that they might fail. They're likely to fail, especially at the beginning, and then we would try again in a bit different manner. Or if something succeeds in these small prototypes, then we basically try to build buy-in from everyone and then move to a slightly larger bit of coordination, and then building up from the bottom to the broader coordination model. One thing that is relevant also for the slides that comes after, and the slides that come after, is that originally we had this 4 work stream, but now things changed a bit. So now we have 3. One is on routine social protection or routine social assistance, one is on shock responsiveness, and one is on referral. I think Momin mentioned that, and probably Iain after me is going into that even more. But for those who might not be familiar with the context in Palestine, somebody might say, okay, but why there is a routine, regular program work stream that shouldn't be a humanitarian focus? In reality, the situation is that the occupation has been ongoing for decades. And while there is no active conflict, or there is no constant active conflict, the humanitarian context, or the context, really drives humanitarian needs. So even in moments when you wouldn't hear on the news, active conflict in Gaza or in Jenin or anywhere else, still humanitarian work is very much needed because of the context of occupation and violence that happens in Palestine. Getting back to the work stream, we work at 2 different levels, which are very much joined together. We work on a micro level, and this is exactly what I was explaining before. So doing these small prototypes, trying small thing here, small thing there, trying to get together 2 actors, 3 actors, very, very small, which then all together would be to a coordination model. But then at the same time, we work at the macro level. So trying, for example, to map institutions, understanding who should be there in general, around the table, but most importantly, also trying to build a unified vision, which has proved not that easy. I believe there are a lot of similarities in terms of what is the dream goal of each one around the table, but that doesn't necessarily lead to a unified vision right away. So that's work done on that level as well. And these two levels really bring to the creation of coordination framework, which then translates into the different areas of cooperation between humanitarian agencies and social protection schemes. Now, we did have some small wins. Now, the work started, as Momin said, sometimes in 2021. The group was established, I think it was May 2022. And we did had a lot of challenges on many aspects, but we did have some small wins as well. The first one is really, as the Rome assessment mentioned, the fact that now people start talking to each other. So we got humanitarian actors presenting at Social Protection Sector Working Group. We got MoSD coming to the National Cash Working Group. They also came to the Gaza one in the past. So that they've been able to actually access the physical and coordination space of the other part of the continuum is a win in itself. Another thing that is important is that, for example, NGOs in Gaza can now have an easier or direct access to authorities in Ramallah. Now, I need to a step back here for those of you, again, who are not very familiar with Palestine. As Momin mentioned, there are basically two governments in Palestine. So there is the Palestinian Authority, internationally recognized, sitting in Ramallah, and then you have the de facto authorities in Gaza. Now, social protection is managed by Ramallah for both the West Bank and Gaza. But then organizations in Gaza are, because of their presence in the geographical space of Gaza, are very much in need to coordinate, connect, and engage with authorities in Gaza, and that has led in the past to issues in terms of additional layers of coordination, of disagreement between different institutions, and delays or roadblocks in terms of delivery of assistance to those most vulnerable. So the fact that NGOs in Gaza have now this more direct access to the central management of social protection schemes is definitely positive, while not canceling the need, of course, to include Gaza authorities to levels in the discussion. The creation of safe space is also important. At least since the alignment of social protection, cash and voucher assistance became a hot topic in our world, there's always been the question of trust, or the discussion around the fact that there is not necessarily a lot of trust between the two, ends of the social assistance continuum. The creation of the group has allowed, to a certain level, way more openness, transparency, and really trust between, or at least trust to share red lines and issues. The group itself, I think another way is that the group itself represents or speaks a lot to the nexus considerations. As we were saying, the group is made up of practitioners, implementers at different levels, donors, governments, experts, and so on and so forth. So that really brings together everybody, which should be across the nexus. A last one, I think it's interesting, is that there was I think there was an assumption that a lot of the work needs to be technical. Okay, so sit together, see how we can share lists, what are the limits of sharing lists, how we calculate transfer values, how we refer cases, how we split caseload. In reality, especially over the past, since we merged workstream 1 and 2 into the routine social protection workstream, there is a clear understanding by key actors that there are major policy and strategy implications to this work, and that needs to be sorted out, or at least taken in deep consideration before moving ahead with technical work. And we saw that also in practice. In many times, what we have been doing so far has often been stopped by somebody saying, "Oh, yeah, technically, I might be able to do this, but I need to ask at higher levels," and that became more and more more and more often, so that there is definitely that factor, understanding those implications and tackling them internally to at least the key actors is something, is a win, because it really will allow us to move on in a more effective and efficient manner in the future. What we learned so far: one, it is super complicated. And I'm not saying anything that you guys would not know. But again, it's not about technicalities. It is really the other part which is the most complex. You know, there are politics coming in, there are budgets, especially in a context, for example, where the crisis has been so long. So there might be less focus in some moments, but also, for example, social protection is also largely, or a good share of social protection is actually paid by international donors, you know. Mandates, and that's something I think Momin said very well before. You know, the ILO is very well positioned because it does not have these conflicts in mandates that we faced with other agencies. There are different interests, so it is really complicated, and it's so complicated also because it's difficult to find a common final objectives we all work through. You know? It's really on a step-by-step process. Something we learned also is that we need to engage larger actors first. At the beginning, I said work streams are open to everyone, which is good in terms of being inclusive, but is not that cool in terms of being effective and efficient. So what we are doing now, for example, with the restructuring of work stream 1 and 2 into this routine social assistance work stream is only focusing on 5 actually main actors, or 3 main actors plus 2 representatives of the rest. Because at the end of the day, we want, of course, everybody to be on board, and everybody should have a say. But there are considerations of caseload budgets and amounts of assistance really that needs to be taken. Again, technical and strategic work needs to move in parallel. That's something we definitely learned, and I think we improved on that side. It must be a two-way effort. Okay, it's linkages between humanitarian cash and social protection schemes. So there needs to be a willingness, engagement, commitment, and efforts from both sides at all levels. And then the final thing we learned is definitely you need to keep changing and adapting. We drafted the TORs in 2021. We had the first meeting, then we included people. We still are in discussion about some people to include, to exclude. We created the work streams and we draft a work plan. Then the work plan was not really used, but we got into the prototyping things. And we started with 4 work streams. Now we are 3 open to everyone. Now we have 1 which is actually close to only some selected actors. So keep changing and adapting, because at least at our level, the feeling I have is that nobody has the silver bullet here, or nobody knows exactly all the steps from here to the final solution. You know, so it's really working together to try to figure out the next step every time. And I will close here, hand over to Iain, and then, of course, if there are questions later on, we'll be happy to take them. Over.
Thank you very much, Luca. So let me share my screen as well. Okay. Ooh, where am I? Wrong screen. Okay. So I hope you can, Karis, can you see my screen?
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm Iain Murray from UNICEF in the state of Palestine. Really nice to be able to present to everyone. I'm focusing on what we defined in Luca's presentation there on work stream 2 now, focused on shock responsive social protection, where UNICEF has been taking a lead in coordinating this work stream. And in that work stream, we're looking at we've been looking at the types of shocks of conflict, which are very prevalent in the state of Palestine, also pandemics, as we've all felt with COVID, natural disasters is increasingly important, and particularly climate is becoming increasingly important. And we had a discussion, and particularly following the earthquake, we've also included earthquakes, but noting that there is a different type of shock when it's an earthquake, where this potential scale of an earthquake is potentially very large, as we saw with the earthquake in Syria and Turkey earlier. So I think both Momin and Luca have both talked about the context, talked about the West Bank and Gaza divide, with having two governments since 2007, and the separation, which is causing some challenges. With the occupation, we've got the issues to do with settler violence, and talk about settlement expansion there. And we saw the issues with the conflict escalation in Jenin very recently. There is the closure of Gaza, which has been many years and is leading to increased poverty rates, much higher poverty rates in the Gaza Strip at over 50% than there are in the West Bank. And also Momin talked about the fragility and the fiscal crisis of the Palestinian Authority, but we've also got declining overseas development assistance, including challenges faced by both WFP and UNRWA with having sustainability. And those are two of the big social safety net schemes that are out there, additionally to the Ministry of Social Development. So that provides some context for why we need this nexus approach to be able to have a work between the Ministry of Social Development as the lead on social, the development side, and the humanitarians. Within this, UNICEF has a global social protection framework which looks at these different levels, so evidence, policies, programs, and administration. And you can see shock responsiveness cuts across all four of those levels. And we have a shock responsive social protection guidance where you can see there are forms of subtopics within each of those. And just going to focus on B, C, and D here. And in the presentation, we will focus on all four, but you can see that these are broken down by policies, strategies, legislation, coordination, financing. For the second, for B, C, programs, looking at intervention types, targeting, modalities. So there's a structured way in which we can look at shock responsive social protection to see within each of these areas, each of these subtopics, how we can build systems. So we've taken this approach with both the social protection framework and the shock responsive social protection framework to build our response and an action plan within that. Now, just to note that UNICEF talks about shock responsiveness. I think the World Bank is also talking about adaptive social protection. I think there's quite a similar similarities between the two, where adaptive social protection takes a climate-based analysis. So within the first area, evidence, we've been building upon a base of evidence. So in 2022, Oxfam undertook a study linking cash and voucher assistance with social protection as one of the first pieces of analysis that was undertaken. And UNICEF built from that. We'd used our global shock responsive social protection readiness assessment tool, which is quite similar to the World Bank adaptive social protection tool, to be able to assess the national cash transfer program, to be able to see whether the national cash transfer program has policies, procedures, coordination programs in place to be able to build shock responsiveness. We also built upon another piece of analysis, which is the one at the bottom, from Al Sahel, assessing the local social protection system response to COVID-19 to try to see how we can have a bottom-up approach to shock responsiveness. And that assessment found some challenges, which I'll talk about a bit later, but including the difficulties and the gaps in coordination between the national level response and the local level response during COVID as a form of shock. Now, in the second area is looking at policies, strategies, coordination, and financing. So noting that there is limited national disaster management capacity, and MoSD is coordinating on the social protection response. We have the traffic light coloring here, where we have a national strategy, we have a good coordination mechanism being set up that both Luca and Momin talked about. However, there is no national legislation on social protection, and ILO is supporting the development of that, but that's posing a barrier to cash transfers. There is a policy about to be developed around shock responsive social protection, and there is an agreement on the need for that, so that's also orange. However, the financing is really a critical gap. One of the important things is that, as Luca said, we're developing the national strategy now for the Ministry of Social Development 24-29, and humanitarian actors are being consulted in what they want to see within that strategy, which is an important progress, where we're seeing the nexus approach going to be embedded within the national strategy, or we're trying to embed it. Within coordination, what Luca and Momin talked about is overcoming the humanitarian development divide in the more routine quarterly, monthly, and day-to-day coordination mechanisms, both at the national level. And myself and Omar in the next presentation will talk about the community planning and partnership councils in the West Bank and Gaza at the local level. However, all of this is challenged where if we have these 5 areas of work and the financing is leading to challenges in payments for the national cash transfer due to the PA fiscal crisis, but also declining overseas development assistance, there is less money coming through the routine national social protection system, which is challenging all of our work. Within the coordination area, as we have a decent base of evidence, we have been then developed we're developing an action plan on shock responsive social protection focused on areas B, C, and D. And you can see in the last column the work that we're building upon from the sub topics that I talked about previously, and under work stream 3, this is an action plan that we're working towards with various partners. One of the challenges we're facing with coordination is due to shock responsive social protection being quite a new and technical area. It's a bit difficult getting some actors on board, while there are some specific actions which are being taken by various actors, which are allowing the different actors to engage, and capturing those actions has been very important, and embedding those actions in the action plan and making it a real-time updated document, pardon me. So one of the things that we did with the evidence base was the shock responsive social protection readiness assessment. We found there were 6 options that were presented in the readiness assessment on how we can make the national cash transfer more shock responsive. Options 1 and 5 were found to be underlying everything, where we're building the systems development of the national cash transfer program, including the data platform, which is option 5 on building the social registry, and also building the case management system is a fundamental for all other options. However, we found that the horizontal expansion of the NCTP in the case of a shock was less appropriate, because it's more difficult to communicate to bring people off the NCTP as the routine system after the shock has passed. So what was found to be more appropriate was option 4 on designing a separate social protection system. So with that separate social protection system, we're learning lessons as we go. During COVID, there was a national response to unemployment through the Wakfit Is COVID response. We're learning lessons from what we're calling the crisis modifiers in Gaza. In May 2023, there was a conflict. In Jenin, in July this year, there was a conflict. And UNICEF is, as much as possible, designing programs with the government to embed the lessons back into the national system and to design towards the national shock responsive social protection protocol. And we're then also trying to work with the PCPCs at the local level to build lessons towards the national protocol. Apologies, I'm hiding behind the Zoom at the top of my screen, but within the design options, we're looking at lessons learned across this range of areas. So on registration and enrollment, in case of a new shock, there are different roles of different ministries. In Gaza, data was collected on newly affected, shock-affected households, the Ministry of Public Works and Housing. The humanitarians largely receive those lists from the Ministry of Social Development. When crisis happened in refugee camps, as was the case with with Jenin this month, then UNRWA is the one that's been responsible for collecting data. So that affects the coordination mechanisms. Payment mechanisms, we're increasingly trying to influence mobile payment to be able to have more real-time payments and trying to work with that into the national system. Information systems, one of the big issues that we're facing and trying to work to overcome is data protection and data sharing agreements. Grievance and redress, we're trying to work with the national system, including by using real-time feedback mechanisms such as Rapid Pro. And building capacity, there's a global capacity building program which the three agencies here, UNICEF, ILO, Oxfam, are working on with WFP and the ministry, Transform, both at the national level and the subnational level. And there's a new SRSP module of Transform. And just finally, to lead into the next presentation, which Omar will be giving, the assessment that was done by Al Sahel at the local level found some issues to do with the coordination at the national level and the local level, and how the difficulties in coordination between national and local level interventions have been challenging, and the need for better coordination. So between UNICEF and Oxfam, UNICEF is working on the PCPC model in the West Bank, and Oxfam in the Gaza Strip, and we're working collectively on terms of reference and to connect the national and the local level work with the PCPCs and building the capacity on shock responsive social protection. I'll hand it over to Omar for the next presentation that will go into a bit more depth on the PCPCs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iain. Omar Ghrieb from Oxfam here, and I'll be taking you through the PCPCs. So this comes under the specific objective number 2, which is responsiveness of the social protection system is enhanced. And then in the beginning, it was called the joint planning groups, which then evolved into the PCPCs, as my colleague Iain said. So the challenge here is that we needed to, Oxfam is leading on creating them in Gaza. And it was something that is unprecedented because we don't have any such mechanism in Gaza before, while in the West Bank, they did actually have such groups, even if the MoSD saw that a new system needed to happen, they had a base to work with. When in Gaza, we needed to form our own, if we can say so, also building on the previous examples of the MoSD in the West Bank and learn from it. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about the partnership and community planning, and the purpose and rationale behind creating them. So we needed to take a multifaceted and multi-layered approach. We needed to work on enhancing the system in terms of the response and mechanism, but we also needed to make sure that we improve the quality of the social protection services. We ensure a better and faster response during emergencies. And this, we're going to be talking in large about it in the upcoming slides. Also, something that we did the case study that Iain talked about, something that we're very interested in doing is enhancing the coordination between the Ministry of Social Development and both informal and formal partners in the Gaza Strip, especially during emergencies. And finally, we needed to stick to the collective ethics and values such as ensuring inclusivity, diversity, decentralization, accountability, and participation. So let's start with what was in the next slide, what was the formation methodology behind creating those councils? So at first we went to the candidate organizations after we did a mapping to create a shortlist. And here we're looking at relevant stakeholders on a national level in Gaza that actually work in social protection, women organization, all that jazz. Of course, I'll be explaining more in the upcoming slides. So we did a mapping of these organizations, and then we did field visits to understand more about their work and tell them about what we are about to do and see if they're interested. Then we helped them start applying for a membership. Then reviewed the membership application. Of course, not just Oxfam, but our local partner in Gaza or in Occupied Palestinian Territories, Amman, which is the integrity organization. It's a coalition for ensuring integrity. And then we did meetings to prepare them and explain everything, and also go with them on the plan on how we'll be moving forward. And then we did respond to applications. So as you're going to see in the next slide, we went to 50 local organizations, NGOs, CSOs, CBOs, to create 5 PCPCs across Gaza. So we got 33 organizations signed the MOU, and this agreement is basically to ensure commitment, their full understanding. And before that, we presented to them the framework guidance, and this we had to build with an expert, also with our local partner, Amman, because as I said, it was something that is unprecedented in Gaza. So we needed to, think and brainstorm, of course, with our partners and with the MoSD of what might work in Gaza. So first we needed to ensure that everybody is included. So we went to national organizations that work in education, social protection, women empowerment, health, youth, mental health, SRH, WASH, FSL, development, social services, and all that, just to make sure that we're covering all sectors and nobody is left behind. We also went to organizations that work with people with disabilities. And then we wanted to look more into the geographical breakdown to ensure also that these groups cover all of Gaza. So 4 organizations from the north, 11 organizations from Gaza, the center city, then from the middle area, 9, then Khan Yunis, because it's a big governorate, 5 organizations, and then finally the south and Rafah, 4 organizations. So in the next slide, I'm just showing you a bit of the field visits that happened. Relaxed meetings that we, presented answers to any questions. And then we explained more about the MOUs and we got it signed up. So after that, in the next slide, we are talking about gender balance, which was very important to us, but also something that was mentioned in the ROM mission that my colleague Momin talked about, telling us to make sure that we include a gender balance. So among the 33 members, we have 17 males and 16 females representing their organizations. as you can see in the chart, how the data is actually disaggregated. And then if we go to the next slide, which really delve more into not just the gender-based analysis, but also the level of participation. So we wanted to ensure that this is a diverse representation of functional levels among the members. We wanted to ensure the diversity is a comprehensive approach. And this is not just to check a box. This is because we wanted to target decision makers and, you know, those who are directly involved in planning processes. So with input from individuals at various levels of responsibility within their respective institutions. So the members include the chairman of the board of directors, and then senior management employees, and finally medium management employees, as you can see in the chart. And here, when we're talking about 5 groups, each group should have been formed by 5 members, but because we got a lot of participations, we actually increased that. So the main chair of the group would be the team of the Ministry of Social Development under the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, but their team in Gaza. And then the second level would be involvement of the governorates, because as we said, this should include all the governorates across Gaza. And then, and this is also to ensure inclusivity and to ensure sustainability, which we'll be getting into. So for the next slide, we're talking about the methodology to ensure the participation. And here we needed to really reflect on important things like the right to participate. So this was not mandatory. When we went to organizations, we made sure that they understand that they have the right to participate or not. We told them that we're going after inclusiveness. We made sure that we are very vigilant towards geographical distribution. And because this is the first time we pilot something like this in Gaza, we also made sure we document the process to learn from it as well and to present it to those who need it. And then we ensured the legal status and governance. So we made sure that we respect the mandate of every organization that is involved. And then to go very fast to sustainability, the next slide. So this was a topic that we needed to ensure. And here, the formation itself of the groups would hopefully ensure sustainability because it's embedded in the work of the governorates and the organizations as they do the emergency response, but not all of that. They have to ensure and help the MoSD in Ramallah or under the Palestinian Authority. They have to help them with the response during emergency in Gaza, but also ensure that the humanitarian response is cohesive and help with that as well. So we tried to ensure sustainability by creating a reference framework to ensure clarity and the breakdown and how we're trying to achieve a long-term goal with that. We, as also Iain said, we are about to go into training capacity building for the PCPCS, whether in strategic planning, social protection from a human rights-based approach, or even social protection and shock responsive social protection. And then we ran raising community awareness campaigns to make sure to highlight the importance of work of such coordination bodies who will not just be helping the MoSD with their interventions, but also ensuring that people's voices are heard. Then the next slide is about the required level of coordination. And here we talk about the difficulties because due to the geographical and political fragmentation that the OPT is going through, we had to go through a delay of 1.5 years just to make sure that all relevant parties agree to the framework of those PCPCs and their work, and to ensure that there is no duplication, to ensure clarity, and to ensure that they will be really efficient and help when needed. That took time, but we gladly, went after this and we achieved it. And then we talk about what's next. So we're planning for the first PCPC's meeting in Gaza for all the members to meet each other and start talking and planning. Then we talked about the training that will be happening soon, next month, hopefully. Then we will ensure that those PCPCs will be involved in a policy brief, and that includes field visits, so they need to really understand and talk to the people and know where we stand. And then they'll be involved in an opinion poll, and mainly this to really understand the social protection landscape and floor in OPT, their understanding of the Ministry of Social Development Services, their satisfaction, the gaps, what can be enhanced, and finally their planning, so they can be ready to get involved in any emergency when it happens, to coordinate not just among themselves, but also help the Ministry of Social Development and help humanitarian actors as well. And that's I guess the end. Thank you very much, and I'll go over to Manal. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Good evening, everyone. My name is Manal Abu Ramadan. I'm a Director General of Planning and Aid Management at the Ministry of Social Development since 1999 until now. My main responsibilities is the supervision and preparation and implementation of the MoSD strategy. And I am supervising the relationship with donors and partners and follow up with all the funded project. The Ministry of Social Development is the leader of the social protection sector in Palestine and provides overall strategic guidance and coordination to the implementation of the government social development strategy. This includes the National Cash Transfer Program, which is to target the households living in deep poverty at Palestine. MoSD is constantly striving to strengthen and develop the system to enable it to provide support to all poor and vulnerable families. So we establish the National Social Registry and the case management and the national referral systems to be the core of the social protection system in Palestine. The ministry believes in the importance of cooperation and coordination with other partners in order to provide assistance and services to poor and marginalized families. And when we conduct the assessment with ILO on the social protection floor in Palestine to create a complementary programs with the NCTP, we realized that there is a high coverage of social assistance, but insufficient focus and inadequate transfer levels to make significant inroads against poverty. And there is a fragmentation of the social assistance system between government programs and the international humanitarian efforts, severely limits the system's potential impact. So, the COVID and several wars in Gaza and now in Jenin occurs. So the government and the international partners have prioritized social protection interventions, including through the use of cash and in-kind transfers to provide rapid relief to households impacted by the crisis. The Nexus project came to maintain all the fragmentation and to strengthen the social protection system in Palestine to become shock responsive. I don't want to repeat what my partners said, but I want to emphasize about the government, how it's important this project came to at the government level. When we, through this project, we work on the two levels with the humanitarian and development partners to enhance the coordination in order to cover better social protection, especially in light of the conditions of the government in suffering from, such as from the fiscal crisis, such as the declining in Arab and international support, and the occupation's piracy of clearing funds, which was led to the inability of the Palestinian government to fulfill its obligations towards many segments of our Palestinian people. The most important of which are the poor and marginalized groups who, in addition to their poverty, they are the first group to be affected by the shocks and crises, whether from occupation or other disasters and shocks. The improving of coordination and harmonization efforts between the Ministry of Social Development and international partners in the humanitarian and the development fields with regard to implementing the national strategy for the social development sector and within the framework of formalizing communication coordination mechanism at the sectoral level. We are emphasizing all our partners. There is a need for the various partners to use our national registry system to manage data for the beneficiaries of the various protection program to ensure our goals of achieving justice during the distribution of aids to the needy. So that I don't want to repeat about the creation about the thematic working group for cash and voucher and the work streams, because it was mentioned by my colleagues earlier. The second level for the work for the PCPCS, Mr. Omar mentioned it earlier already. You know, as the importance of this project, as most in the stage of internal reforms of its social protection system, it's a good way to bring all players from both sides from different approaches as the humanitarian and development to work together for the benefit for the poor and marginalized under one umbrella. Although we are still have some challenges to reach our goals, but everyone has the will to get over it, and we continue to correct our path towards the goal we want. The success of this experience as a government is to bring the both sides to sit together to discuss all the matters related to the social protection on one place. And for the first time, consultations between the two sides are taking place in preparation the new strategy for the Ministry of Social Development for the upcoming years of 2024-2029 to reflect the nexus approach in our strategy. As a government, I said this is a very good experience to have with all our partners. And we keep learning from this experience and changing every time to adopt new best practices toward this goal. Over. I'm handing this to Karis. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. I'm just starting my video. And thank you to all of the presenters for your, I think, very comprehensive overview of the situation here and the work that we've been doing. So we will now go for some time for discussion. We have around 15 minutes remaining. If all of the presenters would like to put your cameras back on for this part of the session. So audience, thank you already for putting some questions in the Q&A, and please feel free to add more if you have anything you want to ask. Just to read out the first questions that we've received. So there is a question from Luca Pellerano, the social protection specialist with the ILO in the regional office. So the question is for Luca Sangalli. You mentioned the differences in vision and language between humanitarian and development partners. Can you share a bit more on the points on which it has been easier to find conversions and the areas where it has been harder to come to terms with each other's perspectives? I will read out a couple of questions at once and then let you answer. So that was for Luca Sangalli. I then want to go to Artyom Cici's question. So he's a social policy specialist for UNICEF, I think based in Moldova. So I know, Iain, that you have answered this question in the chat, but I wonder if you could speak a bit more. The question is, practice shows that often only nationals are eligible for non-contributory cash transfers. If we assume scaling up cash transfers and covering nationals or citizens in emergencies is realistic, would this be the case for foreigners like refugees? They frequently are not eligible for social protection and humanitarian support funded by a state. Do you have experience in dealing with this? What would be key arguments to convince governments, especially in countries where social protection budgets are quite compressed? Any suggestions? So I think here you could talk about the situation with UNRWA, and also maybe around the trying to implement social protection in countries where the budget is really compressed, because it's the situation that we're facing here at the moment. Finally, a third question to Manal. Was the case that the social registry and case management system in the ministry finalized or not yet, and what's the status update of that? So to Luca Sangalli first, and then to Iain, and then to Manal. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Caris. Let's start with the point that we haven't found that many. I would say there has been progress on many different fronts, but I wouldn't say that many final achievement or results that would justify. I would justify saying that convergence was found. But if I have to think about something, I would say that the more technical and practical work has been, I think, has been when we focus on that, that has been a bit easier to probably move forward, even though again, not to final results yet. When we came together, we looked at, for example, the prototype I was mentioning before, so the cross-check of, for example, 30 households. We faced major issue at the beginning in terms of data sharing possibilities of different patterns, but then once there, it was pretty, at least for the major actors, was pretty quick, to do the cross-check and then come to and talk together in terms of technical and practical elements. On the other side, I think the main issue, or the main roadmap that we keep hitting is on the final. I think it can be summarized in a very easy manner, which is, again, there has been some progress here, but at the beginning was way stronger, and I think we managed to smooth a bit of edges. But when we start this work, and I'm saying end of 2021, beginning of 2022, there were, I think, two main positions, at the two extremes of the continuum, So on the one side, there was a general feeling from humanitarian organizations, and again, I cannot generalize to everyone, but for humanitarian organizations, there was a general feeling that, yes, I mean, we were requested to coordinate with MoSD. More of, sometimes it was more felt as an imposition even, but I mean, we are independent humanitarian organization, so we can actually do whatever we want. And on the other side, there was the feeling that we are the ministry, that's, we need to be the lead of everything here, And I think these two extreme positions have come slowly towards each other. There are still some, as it should be. I mean, we are 1 year into this work, which I think will take years and years to finalize, in a proper manner, So it doesn't make sense. It makes sense that we haven't found like the final solution now. But I think these two extreme positions did move slightly towards each other. So there was an increasing recognition by humanitarian organization that it's not that the ministry wants to be the boss, it's just that it makes sense to work with the Ministry of Social Development, because we are all aiming at the same objective, and they are definitely the authority here, while still wanting to keep that humanitarian independence and flexibility that characterizes our work. And on the other side, there's also been an understanding that it cannot be just a request to comply, but there needs to be work done on a more ground level, So that, I think, it's probably still one of the main points of difficulty. I'm thinking very, very very basic. And I think Manal can also complement on this, because we did have this discussion between us a few times. I think there is still now, so the ministry is working on this national social register that was mentioned by some colleagues before. And there's an assumption from the ministry side and humanitarian level. So for example, this thing is one of the one.
Luca, I think your internet has dropped, in which case maybe we can go to Iain to answer the next question.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, I think the question there was in two parts about managing the response to refugees and managing the response in a low budget environment. So I think, as I put in the chat, so in the Q&A in response to Artyom, I don't think the state of Palestine is a good comparator to many other refugee hosting environments, where there aren't a lot of refugees from other countries in the state of Palestine, but there are a very large population of Palestine refugees who've been there since 1948 and 1967. And it's with the situation here in the state of Palestine, they are within the territory of the historic Palestine, but with the division in territory between Israel and Palestine, they are refugees from the original locations. So be it where Tel Aviv is, Jaffa is next to Tel Aviv. Many people went in 1948 to Gaza and are considered refugees in Gaza, and have been refugees since 1948, managed with the response managed by UNRWA, which is a UN agency. So it's not the same situation where you would face with, for example, Syrian refugees going to Jordan or Lebanon, or indeed Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon, Syria, or Jordan. The more pertinent side of that question, I think there's something that we can all learn from, is how you can manage in a low budget environment. And we've had budget constraints facing the National Cash Transfer Program over the last 5 years, which has really caused major concerns because there's been particularly a reduction in the number of transfers made by the National Cash Transfer Program since 2018, which is supposed to pay quarterly payments to deep poor households based upon the proxy means test formula. But as the Palestinian Authority particularly, but also reduction in ODA has hit, it meant that there's been a reduction in the number of quarterly payments, and in some cases a reduction in the number of the value of the transfer value of the payments that have been made. So what we're trying to do is to look at analysis of the recertified budget data, but also to try to look at redesign to support the options, to try to re-support the government to see how they could afford to make a more reliable national cash transfer program, which could be based upon categories of beneficiaries who receive payments, such as, for example, to persons with disability, elderly, or children, and trying to overlap that with the policy framework of the ministry, and with the EU and the World Bank as key sector stakeholders who are really interested in that. From the nexus approach, that's really important, because what the humanitarians rely upon is knowing what will be paid for from the regular system, in order to know who will be reached on a regular basis and then who is not reached, to be able to plan for humanitarian intervention. I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks. And for Manal to answer the question around the social registry and case management system, if it's finished or not.
The national registry system is almost finished and will be active at the beginning of the next month to receive new cases. You all know that at the first stage, we have been updating our data for 134,000 families who received various services from the ministry, not only the cash transfer program beneficiaries. Now we run the new PMGF on all the certified data and have the and analyze it. We will produce our new programs, 3 programs for elderly persons with disability and the poor families very soon. About the case management system, it's under development yet, but it will be very soon activated very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. And so we have just 5 minutes left. I want to ask a kind of closing question to all participants, to all of the presenters, if you just want to give 1 minute's worth of reflections. And we also have a specific question for Omar. So to Omar, the question is, were the PCPCs opened for all the CSOs in Gaza and the West Bank? And do you have a plan to expand the number of CSO participation in these PCPCs? I think Manal could also answer some of that. And then my question for all of the presenters is, from the work that we've been doing, what do you think are the key elements to successfully implementing the nexus? And how much can these things that we've found here then be generalized to others in similar contexts or fragmented contexts or with budget constraints? So things like institutional barriers or mindsets of different actors or principles of different actors. How could the things we've learned here be generalized to other contexts? And I think I will go to Momin first, and we can go in the kind of running order of the presentations. So Momin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Karis. I think regarding the first part of your question, how can we ensure or how to successfully implement the nexus, not in Palestine, but also worldwide? I think there are 3 aspects. The first of which is willingness to adopt the nexus approach and to collaborate with other actors, especially that we know that we're always bugged with our work, and there's also a limited availability for us to work with others on mutual aspects. So I think that's the first important aspect, that is willingness and ability to work with others. The second is to put always beneficiaries in the back of our minds, because honestly, the nexus, after all, is the main objective is to serve the population in the most coherent way, to the most extent possible, in an efficient way as well. So that's what we should always keep in the case of Palestine, where there are so many actors, and we, after all, each organization and actor wants and aims to serve the beneficiary. And the third one, quickly, is to be open to understand each other's and the red lines and concerns of other actors as well, not in a competitive way. Now, for the second part of your question, which is, some similarities that we could, or challenges faced in Palestine that could be in other contexts, I think it's the fiscal crisis. Even though that we have very severe fiscal crisis and financial crisis in Palestine, but in the nexus approach, we managed to make some progress and steps towards enhanced coordination. And I think this is something that we could take it outside Palestine, since now the world is having a lot of financial difficulties as well. So I think that's an important one to take into consideration, that the nexus approach does not largely need a huge fiscal crisis. We can work with what we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Momin. And Luca, if you just have 30 seconds, 1 minute of a reflection.
Yeah, I was thinking one of the, so I'm looking at it from the humanitarian point of view, being as the coordinator of the cash working group here. I think one.
Luca, you're on mute.
Okay, I am muting myself now. So sorry for that. So my point really relates to the humanitarian side of this work. The one thing that we are learning now, which has also informed the creation of the routine social protection workstream, is the need to understand what is what when doing this work. We have very high expectation for the work of the routine social assistance, social protection work stream. And I think one of the elements that might make it very effective compared to other attempts we've done before is the shift we have imagined for some of these more structural programs, the one Momin was referring at the beginning, from more the humanitarian sphere to others, because that really then helps understanding what are the boundaries of each one, of each element of this continuum, and then making it easier to work together. So probably, and that's something that can definitely be replicated in other contexts, especially where, I mean, I don't think there is a context where the crisis is as protracted as Palestine, but where many years of crisis have led to this becoming structured of some of initial humanitarian programs. So understanding who is who, and then starting from.
Thanks.
I think we might have lost. Yeah, I think just very quickly, as Luca was saying there, it depends upon the context. I think a lot of the lessons we've learned here are very relevant to other countries which are crisis affected, where there are frequent crises. In Palestine, we're affected particularly by frequent conflicts, but other countries in Southeast Asia, for example, are affected by frequent natural disasters, and they also probably have many organizations providing humanitarian cash alongside the government. And I think a lot of the lessons that we've learned here would be very applicable to other countries where there are other frequent disasters and crises, and using a social protection SRSP framework like the UNICEF's one or the World Bank's one is very relevant to see where we have opportunities for coordination. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. And Omar, go ahead.
Thank you, Karis. To start with answering the PCPC's question, so Oxfam was leading on creating those coordination bodies in Gaza, which we did, and now we're thinking on how to connect them with the West Bank, which a conversation that us and UNICEF will have, maybe quarterly meetings. For the numbers of the groups, of course, we said we started with 25, now they are 33. This goes on the appetite of the organizations and the clear and effective participation. So yes, of course, it can increase if this adds to the group. To your question, the first part, I think the biggest learning, especially for our part at Oxfam, is definitely open dialogue and coordination. Even if it takes time, eventually you're going to get to an understanding between all relevant stakeholders, and they will get over the differences when it's actually helping people at the end. And this was the biggest lesson. In terms of how we can applicate it, it's easily applicable, especially the PCPCs and other similar contexts in the MENA region like Iraq and Yemen, but also apparently in Latin America as well. It's something that my colleagues in other regions are interested, and this is why we're documenting the model and the approach itself, so we can, export it to other interested and similar contexts. Thank you.
Thanks. And Manal? You're on mute, Manal.
Manal. Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. I'm totally agree with all of you about the PCPCs in the West Bank. We have some successful stories for these groups in Salfit. They are acting well, and we are doing a good coordination between all the civil societies and line ministries there in the level of the governorate. So we can connect them to the new established in PCPCs in Gaza, and have, like my colleague Omar said, a quarterly meeting. It's good, and we can expand it according to their functions, because it's different between one district to another. About the other things for the nexus, yes, agree with you, Momin, because the willingness is the will for everybody is very important to go through this issue. And I think everybody from the both sides that they have this willingness to go through the nexus approach. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I want to give one final reflection too, to kind of sum up what the other presenters have said. If you imagine looking at a cylindrical tube, then from one side you just see a rectangle, and say if this is humanitarian actors in Gaza who are, say, a local actor. From the other side, if you look at it, you see a circle, say this is the ministry in Ramallah. Before we set up these coordination structures at different levels, you would have both actors zoomed in, looking at their side and not being able to understand each other. And I think now, through having this joint coordination body and associated forums and discussions, we've been able to zoom out and see the whole picture. And that means that things that upfront would be a reaction in terms of lack of trust or a misunderstanding about whether or how to engage the authorities in Gaza in these discussions, or about how to do data sharing with all of the data protection issues. These things that were unsurpassable before have become something that we understand each other's perspectives, and now we're able to discuss with a full understanding together. So I think dialogue really has been one of the key things so far. So I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists for taking the time and providing your insights today. And thank you to the active participation from all of the audience as well. We hope that you've been interested to learn what we have shared so far. And we look forward to kind of keeping you updated in the future. So thank you, everyone. Wishing you a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.